This is Joshua Cohen. He's a former project officer with the United States Agency for International Development. He was involved in managing economic reform projects in the former Soviet Union. Well, let's start there. I mean, it is 4:30 in the morning.
Yes.
You'd think you got to be worn down at this stage. They're talking about maybe another 5 or 6 hours. One would think that's progress.
I think there's been some progress, right? And we even heard Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, say that probably nothing will be signed today, but he implied that there could be something actually signed tomorrow.
Tough talks, one would assume. I mean, if you were to look into your crystal ball, what do you imagine coming out of this?
My opinion is there will be something signed. The devil's going to be in the details. The problem is the absolute best that could come out of this is a ceasefire that essentially freezes the conflict in place. And then the question is, without a true permanent settlement, how long will that ceasefire last? Because each side has different agendas. And in particular, one thing that we have to realize is that the rebels, the separatists on the ground, may not share the exact same desires or goals as Putin. Which is something, so Putin has some control over them, but how much control, particularly on the ground, I don't know. So the best we can hope for is a temporary ceasefire.
And if they feel as though they're gaining ground, a lot of them, the word we're getting, our reporter on the ground there, Kate Parkinson, saying some of these rebels don't really want to give up. They feel like they're making some inroads.
That's exactly true, right? And there is really a fundamental difference between what many of the separatists want and what Putin wants. The separatists would like to capture the entire provinces of Donetsk and Luhansk, and they're certainly not there yet, but they feel they're making progress in that direction, and they ultimately want an independent state. Putin, by contrast, wants the Donbass to remain within Ukraine, but essentially with a high degree of autonomy, almost as a wedge to prevent Kiev from moving decisively west into joining NATO. So
let me ask you about, we talk internally, there's fighting going on internally, externally. There's all these external forces moving about. We've got the German Chancellor, the French President. They're trying to influence things. They went off to visit Putin in Moscow. Of course, Angela Merkel came here to Washington to meet with Barack Obama. But then you hear the stuff that we're talking about today, training exercises, training Ukrainian forces by American forces. You hear of these exercises going on with Russia. It almost seems as a chess match, and these pieces are being moved around on the board. What do we read into all of that?
I think a lot of it is posturing, certainly from the U.S. side, and Obama's been very, sort of open and specific about this, that they were holding off, on supplying arms to the Ukrainians. But if the peace talks fall apart, it looks like there's a very strong possibility, particularly given political pressures in Washington, that the U.S. will supply lethal arms to Ukraine. And there's been a report floating around prepared by sort of 3 of the prominent think tanks in the country, advocating that the U.S. supplies $3 billion total over the course of 3 years to the Ukrainian army, which is a lot of weaponry.
Martial law, Poroshenko discussing that. What do you take away with that comment coming out just as these talks were about ready to begin?
It's basically a same thing, a warning. If this does not work, then this is total war. And that's going to extend to the east as well. So the risk is that without some kind of ceasefire, the bloodshed has the potential to dramatically increase and escalate. The U.S. supplies arms to the Ukrainians. Putin, in turn, surges more Russian troops, and potentially becomes a full-scale open war. So I don't think we're certainly not going to reach a permanent settlement, but the best we could hope is that at least there's some type of ceasefire that comes out of this that lasts for at least some period of time that can at least give some breathing space to come up with a permanent settlement.
One final question before we go. There's been a lot of discussion about peacekeepers basically positioned there. And we talked to somebody in London yesterday who used to be an advisor at the Kremlin who said, Putin is just not going to agree to NATO forces, obviously, and not UN forces. I mean, what can come as far as a force there? Who do you see actually maintaining that position?
The issue is, from Putin's perspective, that he does not want any forces along the Russian-Ukrainian border. The Ukrainians, of course, would like to regain full control of their border with Russia, which they've essentially lost. For Putin, that's a hedge. As long as he has access to the border, at least some parts of the border, he can always up the ante and surge Russian troops into the Donbass if things fall apart. So that's going to be very, very difficult to reconcile, and we probably won't know what they've agreed on that until the talks end in 5 or 6 hours or whenever they do.
Well, we'll call you back in about 6 hours. How's that,
Okay.
Joshua? Thanks so much for coming in. Certainly appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Mike.